my favorite thing, which is one of us in person right here talking to us. And today it's Russ Hartenstine. Why is it a good thing to have one of us speak right here? Well, we get to know each other a little bit better, which I think makes us a stronger congregation. We don't look for spiritual guidance from elsewhere, but from within our own group. And another thing I like about having Russ here is he's going to be telling us about something he actually did, which is different from just what he's thinking about. And of course, he's here in person. We're also lucky today, because Jeremy Berlin and Peter Halpern couldn't make it, to have Wes Naj at the piano, an accomplished musician. He spent some time at Juilliard, composed music for TV and I think the movies while he was on the West Coast, an experienced church musician. He's played for many famous bands and sometimes with members of the Rolling Stones. He's very comfortable offering to give his rendition of the songs, which I picked out as somehow being connected with what Russ is going to say. Okay, now, before we begin, I'd like to introduce the visitors, and I'll bring around a handheld mic. It's totally optional. If you want to stay unknown, incognito, that's okay too.
My name is Jonathan Stevens, and I am visiting my sister here for Thanksgiving. And I grew up in the suburbs here on the island, so it's...
Where are you from?
Seattle, Washington.
Wow.
Yeah.
So my daughter just moved to Seattle.
Yeah. And I belong to the Center for Spiritual Living in Seattle. That's a universal approach. And so this is more like home. Had nothing to do with it, so.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Vicki Osborne. I'm Tom's sister, and I hail from from Boise, Idaho. And I'm visiting my brother here on the island. I come out a couple times a year, and I just love it here, and I love your church.
Thank you. We love you too.
Hi, everybody. I'm Donna Kelly from Chappie. Tom's friend and Vicky's friend. And I've never been to a Unitarian church. In fact, I don't think I've been to church in a zillion years. So I'm just interested to find out about what's going on here. I could use a little spiritual help.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Ensign, and I just recently moved to Oak Bluffs, and but I've been coming up for summers since I was about that big. And I was a member of All Souls in Washington, D.C., and had the privilege of Reverend Rob being our senior minister. And I found out recently that he had been here for a year, and I just got in touch with him just last week, and we corresponded. So I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
Talking to the lady who hasn't been to church in a while, I think if you haven't been to church in a while, coming to the Unitarians is a good way to start out. Many people helped put the service together this morning. The greeter was Judy Crawford. At the welcoming table, we had Karen Sankey. Bill Bridwell did the setup. Our techie is Chris Seidel. And the refreshment table will be managed by Sue Streeter. We will now begin our service. Chalice, Steve will, as I light the chalice, Steve will do our opening words. Steve Eng.
Good morning. I'll read some words from William Schultz. How's that? Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power, and let its vision change your heart. Amen.
I grew up Methodist, and we had a wonderful song at Thanksgiving. We gather together to sing the Lord's praises. It's my song for Thanksgiving. Well, the Unitarians changed it a little bit, but we have the same tune, number 67. We sing now together.
organ. Thank you, Wes. Anybody remember the last time we heard that organ? Like a year, 2 years ago? You're invited again, man. This reading comes from the inspiration of why I went down to North Carolina. Without putting too many words of my own into this story, I wanted to quote from one of, I think, the greatest stories I've ever written called East of Eden by John Steinbeck. There's a small chapter here I'm going to read from, chapter 34. A child may ask, what is the world's story about? And a grown man or woman may wonder, what way will the world go? How does it end? And while we're at it, what is the story about? I believe that there is one story in the world, and only one, that has frightened and inspired us so that we live in a pearl-white cereal of continuing thought and wonder. Humans are caught in their lives, in their thoughts, in their hungers and ambitions, in their avarice and cruelty, and in their kindness and generosity too, in a net of good and evil. I think this is the only one story that we have, and it occurs on all levels and feelings and intelligence. Virtue and vice were warp and woof of our first consciousness, and they will be the very fabric of our last. This, despite any changes we may impose on field and river and mountain, on economy and manners, there is no other story. A man, after he has brushed off the dust and chips of his life, will have only left the hard, clean questions. Was it good or evil? Have I done well or ill? In uncertainty, I am certain that underneath their topmost layers of frailty, men want to be good and want to be loved. Indeed, most of their vices are attempted shortcuts to love. When a man comes to die, no matter what his talents and influence and genius, if he dies unloved, his life must be a failure to him, and his dying a cold horror. It seems to me that if you or I must choose between two courses of thought or action, we should remember our dying, and so to live that our death brings no pleasure to this world. We have only one story. All novels, all poetry are built on the never-ending contest of ourselves of good and evil, and it occurs to me that evil must constantly respawn, while virtue is immortal. Vice always has a fresh orange face, while virtue is venerable as nothing else in the world is. Nice. Good morning, everybody. Everybody kind of knows me. You really do know me, but my last name is Hartenstine. Okay, we've been here since 1724. It was changed 4 times in the 300 years. Hartenstine. S-T-I-N-E. It's a joke because it's going to happen my whole life. And my daughter is here, and she knows the joke because she gets suffered it all the time too. My mother's over here. She has a simpler name. It's Henry. And I'd like to thank everybody else who's also tuning in via Zoom. To quickly say some things, I want to thank Peter Palchis for asking me about talking about this experience. I really did not want to. It's a deeply personal and very difficult story to talk about, and it still screwed me up some 60 days later. But just like everything, Peter's work is because we need it. And when he asked me, I felt that it was a good thing to do, so I'm doing it for the worship committee and in honor of his effort. I also want to thank Chris Seidel, who's going to help me scroll through some photos unrehearsed. I have a actually a lot of photos to show you, and it's going to kind of go in chronological order, and Chris is going to scroll through those as I talk without much direction, so I appreciate however this works out. Before we get to the photos, I should also say thanks to Liz, who's also holding up the coin on just about everything right now. A couple of backgrounds on the hurricane. You probably know that Hurricane Helene swept through Florida, Georgia, North Carolina during September 26th and 27th. The states with the most damage were Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. North Carolina, to me, when I was watching, seemed the worst hit, which is why I decided to go there. What I read was that some 100,000 residents of the Piedmont Range and southern Appalachians without water and power. Flooding had also created substantial damage. Thousands of houses were destroyed or damaged. Roads were completely washed out, and most of the infrastructure, wires were down everywhere. There was nothing left. There still is not much left. The town of Asheville had 2 or 3 water stations damaged. These are main water stations, and they were many miles up where they had the reservoirs. The roads themselves were washed out, and they couldn't even get to them some couple months later. It's now only 53 days later, on November 17th, that Asheville lifted its no-drink water ban, but it's still finding lead in its waters from old pipes and disturbance. Thousands are still left without homes, and hundreds of fatalities have been recording, and many people think that the number is higher. It will climb. It was one of the largest disasters we've had in a long time. And as I watched it, I knew that, one more thing. I have a background in volunteering, and it goes deep from the time my mother helped me come to get my civil service, community service merit badge, and I volunteered at a senior center a long time ago, and that changed my life. I helped a woman carry groceries, and she cried because she couldn't couldn't carry them and couldn't even reach the second shelf to put them up. And it was so simple for me. And it taught me a great lesson that volunteering can be just about anything that you have to give, because it's something that you have to give that somebody else needs. It's very basic, super simple. But most of us choose not to share. What I saw that day when I was 14 years old literally changed my life. I went into becoming an orderly. I studied comparative religions. I have always tried to help people because that feeling that I got from helping that person was so powerful to me. It was the only time I've ever felt connected to the world. I most of the time feel disconnected to the world. I'm a very neurodivergent, hyper, smart, complicated man. And I don't feel attached to the world very often. I struggle with that. So when I get an opportunity to volunteer, I can physically affect somebody, connect with somebody. That to me is like the thing. And I hate my job. I don't want to get paid for it, but I love property management. I did emergency management for 14 years, mostly as a volunteer, but also got paid for the town of West Tisbury, and I ended up full-time during COVID. I did it all based on volunteering, and I did a part-time job as a full-time job there because I really loved it. I quit because I couldn't do anymore. And that was this summer. So skipping ahead, when this hurricane happened, I have extensive background in 30 years of building, 15 years of emergency management, volunteerism, you name it. I knew I could help. But I didn't really know how to help. I'd always worked with a structure. And so what I did was, almost there are the photos. I signed on to a website through Buncombe County Emergency Management. I do not believe in going rogue. And I ended up going rogue anyway. But I tried to stay with the format. And so I was recruited to go down to Swannanoa, North Carolina, which is definitely one of the worst that was hit, and help set up a distribution center. But by the time I was recruited and the time I got down there, which was 2 days past for driving, the job of setting up the distribution center had already been done, and I was basically asked to carry water around. And now we can start with the photos. I'm going to ask Chris to scroll till she sees some men praying, please, and just hold on to 3 or 4 seconds per photo while I talk. So the first couple of photos you're going to see here are literally of me driving to my distribution center, and this is the flood damage that I saw from a prison just outside of where the distribution center was. That's the high water mark. That's some 6 feet tall of where the water actually receded and then laid all the waste down. The water was higher than that. There's a bridge. There it is. It was actually up to the eaves of that roof right there. That was a river that swelled almost 50 feet higher than its surge. 50. feet. Places that I visited had predicted never to be flooded in over 1,000 years. Never to be flooded. So nothing was prepared, nothing was really well done, and nobody was very well organized. This is where I parked across from at the distribution center. And immediately you're just swept with the need. This was a park that they had set up outside of the Swannanoa library, and they turned it into a full-blown distribution center, and I got some photos of what it looks like. You could come pick up water, you could do all this stuff, and I helped set it up in the morning as far as like putting things together, but in an hour my work was done, and I'm way too hyper and way too qualified. So things kept happening, helicopters flying by. I'm seeing nothing really except a staking at this distribution center. And I'm gonna have to try to talk quickly. That's the place I stayed at night. Somebody actually helped me volunteer. That was my next door neighbor. But what happened was a woman came up to the volunteer table that I was waiting to get some work done with, and she was in extreme duress, and it turned out that her house had been flooded, and she was a hoarder, and her basement was a god-awful mess, and she had no idea what to do. And being bored and hyper and wanting to help, I immediately asked her if I could come. And I went over and immediately found out that it was overwhelming, and I went back to the distribution center. I found another volunteer, convinced that guy to get dirty with me, and in 3 hours we only had a quarter of her basement filled up, but it was the end of the day. I went back to the distribution center to give back this guy who really didn't want to help anyway. And another woman recruited me to follow her. She said, "You're too good for this place. I'll never forget it." She's like, "Your heart's in the right place. You need to go somewhere else." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Right over in the corner, we walk up, and there's this church, and they're doing all this stuff. And it was the stuff I expected to see at the distribution center, but it was a church. It was wagon trains, literally horses and mules carrying stuff up to the mountains. It was people like this coming with chainsaws and praying and getting their jobs and scrolling. One more time, please. Cooking. Water, one more time, for helping like this. All of these people came, we can stop there for a sec, to help. And their houses were just like this one. But they weren't as bad as some, and I saw at this Swannanoa Christian church over 100 people swarming like bees. And there was one guy there, Jake, who was the point man. You'll see him in one of these photos. He has the overalls on him. Not yet new, I think we passed him. But Jake helped me get a couple more volunteers to help that woman clean out her basement, and it took us 2 days, okay? One basement for 400 square foot house, 2 days. That much stuff was in that basement. Wet, gross, cat stuff. But when it was done, the Swannanoa Christian Church, hold right there, took me to this village. The minister there, Brandon, asked me who I was, and I told him I had experience with ICS, which is called Incident Command Systems, and I was an expert in disaster relief. And he's like, "I have a small village that was flooded. Can you help?" I said I had no idea. This village had people stuck in the attic spaces when the water filled up within 2 hours, and that's an evidence of a woman who tried to hack out from the inside. She didn't succeed. She stayed in her attic for 10 hours before the water subsided, and she was able to get out. Some people swam through their attics and out because they thought the water was going to come up and flood them and kill them. This village, there we go, there's the water line in one of the houses, is 40 feet above where the creek sits right now. This was 55 feet water high on the Swannanoa River that goes right by I-40. It's destroyed the interior of these houses completely. What they did was they brought me to a village called Beacon Village, and there were 4 or 5 people of the church there that own houses there. Look at that, that's the backyard. I'll never forget, the guy goes to me, he's like, "We're gonna clean up the inside of your house." I said, "Okay, thank you, but what do we do about my backyard?" 6 inches of mud in your backyard, everywhere. We didn't clean that yet. But that's a good one. That's one of my first images of what I saw on the inside. So when I was there, I was asked to talk to some people about if they wanted help, how to help, what to do for help, and organize the help. They had no trained volunteers. They had no emergency manager. I actually went over to the fire department to ask for the emergency manager, and he wouldn't come to help us. He said they had already been there 4 times. If anybody needed more help, to come to them. Anybody know me as an emergency manager? I ever said that? So I gave up on that, and I turned around and I started looking at the community. And then within the first 3 hours, I met a man named Brian. He'll be at the end of the photos, but he helped us clear that road with his excavator. And then the church gave me a foreman, and I cannot remember his name. The funny thing about disasters, you meet 100 people. It's really hard to remember names. Really, really. And I am embarrassed. This is a photo I want to show you guys real quickly of where the road is. It's a curl called Elliott Avenue that was flooded. There's the river some, I don't know, hundreds of feet away, really. It's 40 feet down, and it flooded that whole area where from the curve on. And that picture of me is kind of in the middle of where all 30 of these houses were flooded. Now, I was asked to help, and why I helped was because I saw that the houses weren't knocked off on foundations. They were over 100 years old. It was a village built by a factory town, basically. And there were no rot on the buildings, and many of them seemed like they were in perfect condition for being 100 years old. And being a restoration carpenter, any wood that's over 100 years old is gold to us. The buildings are better then, materials are better then, and quite honestly, the way they lived was better then. So I was asked, is it worth saving? And I looked at all of the people, and I said, well, what do you think? And they said they wanted to stay there. I said, well, then it's worth saving. Knowing restoration carpentry, all you really have to do is demo all the wet stuff, and that's a lot. You first clear out the mud. You first then clear out the junk, which used to be people's possessions. It's now junk. Everything you've ever owned, I treat as junk, and I'm a stranger to you. So the thing I need to talk about now, real quickly, is that by the time I got in and working with all 30 people, families, I should say, hundreds of volunteers are coming down the pike at the same time, and I'm trying to organize as the incident commander to this whole thing. And I quickly realized that it was going to need a community involvement, so I asked all the villagers that were there to come to a meeting, and we scheduled a meeting the next morning. I was able to get their agreement to kind of unionize, to organize, to stay together, and to work together. One of the people there happened to be a 501c3 organizer. She helped filing out right away, making them a nonprofit and getting them funding, which is still taking time, but a 501c3 person right there. Another person right there was a woman at the top. Her name is Tessica. Tessica, you'll see in these pictures, is really one of the main hero stories out of this, because her house was at the top of the hill, and she didn't get flooded, but as people walked up wet from the road trying to swim out of this mess, she would let them come to her house and stay there. And so she started collecting a lot of people. And her background was in marketing, but she was an incredible communicator, and I had her become our town crier almost immediately. I asked her. And now she replaced me. She's the incident commander, and this place has now gotten millions of dollars worth of funding. They're rebuilding the places as we speak, and Tessica's in charge of it all now. I trained her in ICS. I gave her every piece of restoration carpentry training I could in 4 frickin' days. And now, 50 days later, she's got the respect of hundreds and the work of millions of dollars ahead of her. I am so proud of so many people that stood up, whether they were affected or not, because they believed in their community. And that's the thing. Right there, I just kind of wanted to show you where Swannanoa was. That's the dot on the right next to Asheville. See those hurricane symbols every time you see similar ETA? Anybody, those are all, well, I'm trying to get to a place that somebody let me stay for my first shower 2 days later. And 4 roads were like, all of them washed out in different ways. Everything, the whole infrastructure was so hard. What used to take 15 minutes now takes an hour. So through all of this, people still keep coming, and I'm getting distribution, and all this is happening, and more people from the community are popping up that either live there or live nearby and are reaching out to help in so many different ways. By the way, we finally see FEMA, and all they say is, we're here to evaluate your house. Take this form, and you've already filed, by the way. That's why they came to your house. and that's all we can do for you right now. They've documented it. That's really stressful for a lot of people to see. But meanwhile, you have all these churches coming with free labor, free help, materials, and a guy like me going, oh, over here, that house needs this, or this and this. By the time 4 days were done, my job was actually done. As an organizer, you can only organize until they don't need you. And I learned a really, really hard, very serious lesson about volunteering that I really think is important. Oh, stop here for a sec. When all that flooding was going on, that canoe was part of the story, and they're saving it there because a man named John, who was at the top of the hill, heard of people screaming and trapped in the attic spaces, grabbed a canoe and a hatchet, swam over, or paddled over, and escaped, or had helped hatch out, escape 4 different people and their families from attics. And there's some kayaks in the photos, too, of where other people started to help him. And John is pretty much a very local hero now, who is the most unassuming man you've ever met and doesn't even want to talk about it. But that's the kind of help you find. And I think it's really important to know that it's out there for you, too. One of the things you'll see is, well, we see it in our lives now. We don't know when help is coming. We have no idea what we can do for ourselves, what we're going to do for each other later. That's the form you have to fill out for disaster relief in order to get the churches to come. It's very simple. But when you think you need help and you don't find it, you often think that it's never going to come. And in the biggest disasters of your life, I think we find help no matter what. It comes automatically in amazing ways. This church is a good example. We lost a minister. We have people like Liz and Peter that step up. The Knight family lost the caregiver. We became the caregiver for the Knight family. We are a community around the world. And every time you think it's me versus them, when you're stripped and naked, you're only alone with them. And there is no me versus them anymore. It's just us. This man was an us. I asked him why he was so dressed up. He's like, you know what? With a disaster like this, you got to put on a good face, and it's worthy of getting dressed up. This was a local volunteer kitchen that were feeding brisket, some of the best barbecue I ever had for free. They had tens of volunteers all over the place. Another photo you're going to see is of a massage. These people are giving massage and acupuncture. Any skill you have that you think can help calm a person, treat a person, love a person, that's all you really need to hold together. And that's all in the neighborhood. That hit me pretty hard. I'd walk up past that sign every day when we'd finish the work. So I have a kind of a bittersweet thing that I need to talk about. It's much like this pumpkin in this little picture here. I kind of stuck out after a little while, obviously. My work got to me a little bit. My neurodiverse brain became a little unhinged. And I started to not be as patient with some people as I should be. It was a mistake. And what happened was, while I had the organizational collaboration of 30 people, there was one man there who was a sheriff who was never really around for the work that we did because he was doing other work. And I want to line this out. The sheriff versus Russ is not a us versus them, good versus bad thing, but a loudmouth versus a different kind of a loudmouth. And I do forgive him, but he did fear me. And on the last day that I was helping, which was to transition, literally to teach Tisica, house by house by house by house, what to do next, because after 4 days, I knew I couldn't do anymore. I just did the organization. It was weird. I had nothing but organizing, and once the organizing was done, I was becoming a loudmouth, telling people what to do rather than helping people what to do. Very key there. Learn your lessons, Russ. Try to listen more and talk less. So that's me back at the ferry. But what happened was the sheriff actually sent 4 of his other sheriffs after me. And I ended up, like, as I'm debriefing with Tessica, I turn around and there's 4 sheriffs asking for Russ Hartenstine or some guy named Russ. And I'm like, that's me. Can we see your ID? I'm like, have I done something wrong? We're not sure yet. What that was all about was fear. Northerner Russ telling people what to do. You gotta go here, you gotta go here. The sheriff didn't like that at all. Now, he never made any of the organization meetings that gave me the authority to tell people what to do, because that's what it was. It was people saying, we trust you. But because I never got his, that was pretty bad. And it scared the living crap out of me, honestly. I had a major meltdown. So much so that I thought for several days afterwards that people were chasing me. It triggered a lot of PTSD, everything that I put together showed me fear and hate in the end. And it really kind of screwed me up for a while. But I'm not here to harp about that. I think it's important to talk about trust and how hard it is to give. It's hard to give love when you've been destroyed. For some people, it was easier for others. That sheriff has nothing but fear in his life right now, and I was contesting that, and I forgive him. I offered, and it wasn't accepted. That's okay. So, to some, this has been several hours of writing and nothing written. I have people I would love to tell you about, but the final thing I think it's really important to say, I actually did write. If I learned one major lesson from all of this, it's that humans are genetically wired to unite when under threat. We have a unique quality to lower our guards down and accept help from others when the chips are down. We have another unique quality to run towards fire to help our neighbors when needed. Humanity shows its best self when difficulty arises, and I have witnessed it firsthand, whether it be North Carolina or this church. And I'm proud to be a member of this church. I'm prouder to be a volunteer to those that need help. And I've also learned to be proud to when to ask or receive help. Because quite honestly, it's part of the volunteering process. You can't always give. If you're not willing to accept, you have no knowledge of what a give is. I saw all this in North Carolina. I see it here with you. So please, never shut yourself up or your gifts to others. Someday you might need the same help, and your compassion may offer you another avenue of hope in the future. Thank you for letting me speak today. I love and respect you all.